The boy's hand is shaking in hers when the judge says, "You understand, this decision is permanent." Megan feels his fingers tighten around her prosthetic knee. Small knuckles pressed against the carbon fiber, like he's afraid she'll disappear if he lets go. On her other side, his younger brother is crying so hard, his little chest trembles, silent sobs that punch holes straight through her heart. Across the aisle, their grandmother glares like Megan is stealing something that was never hers to touch. Her lawyer holds up a printed screenshot, the words blown up in black and white. "The leg thing is more than I'm looking for right now." The sentence Megan read on a cheap phone in a noisy bowling alley 3 years ago now glows on an easel in a courtroom like Exhibit A for why she should never have been anyone's choice. The attorney's voice is sharp. These are the kinds of messages Ms. Price received from men she dated. She is damaged. She admits it. Is this really the stability 2 grieving boys need? Megan can feel every eye in the room on her judge's clerks, the row of firefighters in dress uniforms behind her, the folded flag on the table that still smells like smoke if she lets herself remember. She wants to fold in on herself, to be the woman who deleted that message and swore she'd never try again. But the boy to her right whispers, "Mom, please don't let them take us." And for the first time in her life, Megan Price decides she's done letting other people define what she's too much of. She stands her metal leg clicking softly against the tile and turns to face the judge. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. 3 years earlier, Megan Price thought courage was something she used up at work, not something she'd ever have to spend in a courtroom. At 36, she was a child life specialist at St. Luke's Children's Hospital in Kansas City, the lady with the sticker cart and the calm voice, who sat on the edge of exam beds and translated medical terror into stuffed animals and simple words. Her days were full of beeping monitors and brave little faces, tiny hands clutching hers while doctors did their work. When her shift ended, though, the hallways went quiet. Megan went home to a 1-bedroom apartment that still had a dent in the drywall where the moving men had dropped a box marked wedding. The wedding never happened. The car accident that took Tyler 3 years earlier took her right leg below the knee and most of her appetite for being known. She'd gotten good at routines: snap off the prosthetic charge, the battery line up the sock drawer, lay out fresh scrubs. She'd gotten less good at letting people in. Her parents loved her from a distance, in careful, brittle phone calls that skirted around the words disability and future. Her friends had kids and carpools now. Megan had a shelf of medical journals, a rescue cat named Murphy, and a leg that hummed softly when the motor flexed on stairs. Still, the kids at the hospital didn't look at her like she was broken. They thought her robot leg was cool the way it whirred when she bent down to tie a shoelace. They asked questions without flinching. They trusted her. That mattered. It was her coworker Jenna who finally said, "You know you're allowed to have a life outside this place, right?" and signed her up for a Friday night bowling league full of nice single people, I swear. So, on a damp spring evening, Megan let herself be talked into mascara and a denim jacket and drove to Thunder Lanes, the kind of Midwest bowling alley that smelled like pizza grease and childhood. She sat at lane 12, hands folded over the smooth fiberglass of a house ball, waiting for a man named Eric to show up. He never did. Instead, 15 minutes after his start time, her phone buzzed on the plastic table. "Hey, I'm gonna be honest. The leg thing is more than I'm looking for right now. You seem great. I just don't think I'm up for all that. Take care." Megan stared at the message until the words blurred. Around her, pins crashed and someone whooped at a strike. A teenager dropped a tray of nachos and laughed it off. The world kept spinning like nothing had happened. She swallowed hard, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and reached for her cane to stand. She was going to go home, shut the door, and let this be proof that Tyler had been her one shot at being loved. That's when a Diet Coke tipped over on the next table, spilling in a brown river toward her bag, and two boys about 8 and 10 scrambled to stop it, their dad lunging with a stack of napkins and an apologetic groan. "Man, I am so sorry," he said breathless, as the older boy's eyes dropped to her metal foot and lit up with absolute awe. Megan didn't realize how quickly a single moment in a bowling alley would ripple outward until Monday morning, when the hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual and her prosthetics motor hummed louder in her ears. She stood in the doorway of room 412, holding a chart and a bag of stickers, trying to shake off the memory of that text. She'd told herself she wasn't going to think about it here. Not in this place. Not around the kids. But grief has a funny way of echoing in the most unexpected corners. Inside the room, 8-year-old Jonah, a wiry kid with sandy hair and a bandage across his chest, sat stiffly in bed, arms crossed, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, not the nurses, not his mother's, and definitely not Megan's. "You're the one with the robot leg?" he asked, without looking up. His voice had that tough edge boys use when they're scared, but determined not to show it. Megan smiled gently, tapping the carbon fiber. "Guilty." He nodded like he approved, but then his gaze drifted to the hallway behind her. His mother stood there talking to the surgeon, eyes swollen from crying, and Jonah's face tightened the way a kid's face shouldn't have to. "Can you stay a minute?" he asked, voice smaller. "Just stay?" So she sat. So she stayed. Jonah didn't need distractions or superhero stickers. He just needed someone who wouldn't flinch at scars, his or hers. But halfway through their quiet coloring session, voices rose at the nurse's station. Sharp tones. Someone upset. Someone familiar. Her supervisor. Megan really shouldn't be assigned to the more complicated cases, he said, in that too loud, too careful voice people use when they want to sound supportive but are anything but. Parents want stability, and her situation can be distracting. Megan froze mid-crayon stroke. Jonah looked up, following her gaze to the doorway. He whispered, "Are they talking about you?" She forced a smile. "Don't worry about it. Finish your dragon." But the words sank into her like cold water. Her situation. Her distraction. The supervisor continued, oblivious or uncaring that she could hear him. "I'm not saying she can't do the job. I'm saying we should be thoughtful about which families she works with. Some might not respond well to different. Different." That word had teeth. Jonah muttered, "That's stupid." Megan's throat tightened. Language. "It is," he insisted. "You help people. I don't care if your leg's metal or spaghetti." She laughed despite herself. The kid had timing. But when she stepped into the hallway moments later, chart in hand, her supervisor straightened and offered a professionally sympathetic smile that made her skin crawl. "Megan, can I see you in my office?" She followed him down the corridor, past the fish tank and the origami cranes kids folded after surgery. Her prosthetic clicked softly with each step, steady, unashamed, unlike her pulse. Inside his cramped office, he gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "Megan, you know we appreciate your work," he began, steepling his fingers. "But families dealing with major medical crises often prefer a sense of normalcy." "Normalcy," she repeated the word like ash on her tongue. "Yes," he said carefully. "And while it's admirable how open you are about your journey, some parents might not respond well to someone who looks, well, like you've been through trauma yourself." She stared at him. "I'm a child life specialist. Trauma is literally the job." He cleared his throat. "It's not about capability. It's perception. Optics." The new board member, Mrs. Carlson, expressed concerns. Of course she had. The woman who'd toured the hospital last week, wearing pearls and disapproval like matching accessories. Concerns about what Megan asked quietly. He sighed, lowering his voice. Some families might feel uncomfortable with someone visibly disabled explaining medical procedures to their children. It can unsettle them. Unsettle them. The word landed like a sucker punch. She swallowed hard. "So what are you saying, that we may shift some of your assignments? You'll handle more classroom activities, fewer patient support cases, just until we reassess." Megan felt her stomach drop. Patient support was the whole reason she did this work. The one place where she felt she mattered. The one space where her past didn't define her future. "I'm not being demoted," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course not." He smiled like a politician. "Just reallocated." She stepped back, as if she'd been struck. "Because of my leg. Because of perception," he corrected. She left without another word. At the end of the hall, she ducked into an empty supply closet, the cool darkness wrapping around her like a merciful blanket. She braced her hand against a shelf, breathing hard. Not here. Not now. Not in front of the kids. Her prosthetic whirred as she bent her knee, a tiny mechanical sound that had always meant strength to her. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight. When she finally emerged, she nearly collided with Jonah's mother, who wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. "Megan," she whispered, "you're Jonah's favorite part of this whole hospital. Please don't stop visiting him." The words cracked something inside her, something tender and bruised that had been stretched too thin. "I won't," she promised, and meant it. But it was harder now to walk through the day untouched. People noticed. A few nurses asked softly if she was okay, too softly. A father, seeing her prosthetic, subtly guided his daughter away. 2 teenagers in the hallway whispered, "Is she supposed to be working here?" None of it was vicious. All of it was heavy. By the time her shift ended, her shoulders ached from keeping them straight. Still, she stopped by Jonah's room to say goodnight. He was awake, coloring under a dim lamp. "You okay?" he asked, studying her face like he was reading more than she meant to show. "I will be," she said. "Want my dragon?" he offered, holding up the bright red creature he'd drawn. Crooked wings, too many teeth, one eye bigger than the other. He looks weird, but he's tough. Megan's throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. "I'd love him." She tucked the drawing into her bag like a shield. But the day wasn't finished with her. When she stepped outside into the purple dusk, her breath fogging in the cold, she saw a familiar figure leaning against the brick wall near the employee lot. Her father. Still in his auto shop uniform. Jaw tight, arms crossed. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't asked him to come, which meant he had heard something, and nothing good ever followed her father hearing something. "Dad," she asked cautiously. He pushed off the wall, eyes scanning her face, her stance, her leg, as if he was piecing together a puzzle with missing corners. "Pastor Willis ran into your supervisor at some fundraiser," he said without greeting. "Told me the hospital's thinking of pulling you off certain duties." Megan closed her eyes. "Please tell me you didn't come here to yell at someone." "I didn't yell," he said defensively. "I asked questions." She groaned softly. "Dad." "Megan, you work harder than anyone I know. You survived losing your fiancé, losing your leg, and you walked back into that hospital like it was nothing. And now some suit wants to sideline you because they're scared of how you look. It's not that simple, she murmured. It is, he said. People don't know what to do with someone who doesn't fit their little picture. She looked away, the weight of his words pressing into the sorest part of her spirit. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I didn't raise you to let anyone make you smaller. But that wasn't really true, and both of them knew it. His love had always been fierce, but structured rigid in ways that left little room for struggle. Dad, she said quietly, I can fight my own battles. Then why do you look like you're breaking? She didn't answer. He sighed softer this time. Come home for dinner tomorrow. Your mother misses you. Megan nodded, though she wasn't sure she meant it. He squeezed her shoulder awkwardly and drove off. She stood in the cold breath, shaking, knowing there was no universe where she could show him the message from the bowling alley, or tell him the supervisor's words had reopened wounds she'd stitched closed years ago. But she also knew she wasn't done absorbing hits. Not even close. The next morning, she arrived at work early, too early, but she wanted a moment of quiet before the day swallowed her. When she pushed open the playroom door, she found someone already inside. Mrs. Carlson, the new board member. Pearls, clipboard, judgment in human form. She turned eyes sweeping over Megan, slowly, clinically, like she was evaluating a piece of malfunctioning equipment. Oh, she said, with thin politeness. You must be the child life specialist. Megan lifted her chin. Yes. Megan Price. The woman nodded, stepping closer. I watched you from the hallway yesterday. You have a very noticeable presence. Megan forced a steady breath. Meaning. Mrs. Carlson said, voice cool as marble. Some parents may find it upsetting if their already frightened children must interact with someone visibly compromised. Compromised. The word landed like a slap. Megan swallowed. My disability doesn't interfere with my work. That isn't the point, the woman replied. Children need reassurance. Recognizing difference so boldly can create unnecessary distress. Difference isn't distress, Megan said quietly. For children, the woman corrected it can be. For the first time in years, Megan felt heat behind her eyes. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all tangled together. They deserve someone who appears confident, the woman went on. Whole. Dependable. Megan whispered, I am dependable. Optics matter, Mrs. Carlson replied simply. And with that, she walked away. Leaving Megan standing alone in the playroom, dragon drawing crushed slightly in her fist, her breath trembling as the weight finally pushed her to the very edge. The very moment before something breaks. Or someone rises. The fire alarms in the pediatric wing didn't sound like the ones in the rest of the hospital. They were gentler, higher-pitched, designed not to terrify children who were already scared. But on that Thursday afternoon, when the snow outside was falling in slow, lazy flakes, those alarms shrieked with a force Megan had never heard before. She froze mid-stride, halfway to Jonah's room with a bag of coloring pencils. A second later, a nurse sprinted down the hallway. Code Red Playroom, she shouted. Electrical fire in the wall. The words slammed into Megan like a physical blow. Not the playroom. Not where half a dozen kids gathered during therapy break. Not where Jonah's little sister, Elle, had wandered off 10 minutes ago while Jonah dozed. The hallway erupted, nurses unhooking monitors, parents grabbing bags, a cacophony of instructions shouted over crying children. Megan turned toward the playroom. Smoke was already puffing out beneath the closed door, curling along the ceiling. A staff member reached for the handle, recoiled, shouting, "Doors hot! We need facilities! Someone get maintenance here now!" Megan didn't wait. She couldn't. All she could see burned into her mind like a photograph was Elle's small purple sneakers disappearing around that corner minutes earlier, her tiny hand dragging her stuffed dolphin behind her. She heard her own voice in her head. "Stay in your lane, Megan. Classroom cases only, Megan. Some families don't respond well to different, disabled. A distraction." She stepped toward the smoke. "Don't," a nurse cried, reaching for her, but Megan shook her off. "There are kids in there. That's why we need the fire crew. The fire crew is 3 minutes out," Megan said, voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "I'm here now." The handle scorched her glove as she gripped it and shoved her shoulder into the door. It gave just an inch enough for thick gray smoke to pour out like a living thing. She dropped low immediately, instincts sharpened by years of trauma training, and shoved the door wider with her metal knee. The prosthetic whined under the strain, but held firm. Voices shrieked behind her. Someone yelled to stop her. Another screamed her name. Megan crawled forward into the dark. The air was hot, dizzyingly hot. The smell, electric, burning, melting plastic chalk dust hit her like a punch. She kept close to the floor, one hand sweeping in front of her, the other gripping the ground. Kids she called, voice muffled. "It's Megan. Answer me." For a terrifying moment, nothing. Then, Megan, a small voice, squeaked. "Elle," her lungs tightened with a surge of relief. "I'm coming, sweetheart." She followed the sound to the reading nook at the far side of the room. The playroom itself was chaos, fallen books, overturned chairs, smoke swirling in frantic patterns around the ceiling. Flames were licking up the wallpaper near the plug by the window, crackling like they were hungry. In the corner, huddled behind a foam play tunnel, were 3 children. Elle, a boy with asthma, who couldn't have been more than 5, and a little girl in a wheelchair whose hands shook violently as she tried to hold her blanket to her face. They looked up at Megan like she was the single rope dangling over a cliff. Her heart twisted. Her prosthetic throbbed from heat warning sensors buzzing lightly against her skin. Hey, she said softly, crawling toward them. "We're getting out. Right now." Elle launched into her arms, trembling. Megan hugged her close, scanning the other 2. Smoke was rising faster. Her eyes burned. The room hummed with the awful crackle of fire tearing through the wall. She grabbed the boy's inhaler off the floor, shoved it into his tiny hand, and lifted him with her free arm. Then she looked at the girl in the wheelchair. Too much smoke, too little time. She couldn't push the chair and carry 2 kids. But leaving her wasn't an option. "Sweetheart," Megan said, meeting her terrified eyes. "Can you wrap your arms around my neck?" The girl nodded weakly. Megan anchored herself, braced her prosthetic leg, and with a grunt, she didn't know she still had in her, she lifted the girl from the chair, carefully keeping her back supported, and settled her against her chest. 3 children. 1 limb that wasn't real. 1 room filling with poison. She turned toward the door. The smoke was thicker now, crawling downward like it wanted to swallow them before they reached freedom. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed. Her leg squealed, warning her she was overheating the motor. Not now. Not now. Megan forced herself forward. Her childhood flashed her father teaching her to stand steady, even when life shoved her sideways. Tyler's laugh flickered in her mind, warm, steady, telling her she'd always land on her feet. Jonah's dragon drawing crinkled in her pocket. "You help people." Her heart pounded. She pushed harder. Halfway through the room, her prosthetic buckled. She stumbled, crashing to one knee, the children whimpering in terror. Heat scorched her cheek. The fire behind her roared, finally aware of the humans in its path. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." She tightened every muscle she had left. And Megan Price, child life specialist amputee woman deemed unsettling and compromised, rose to her feet with 3 children in her arms and kept moving. When she reached the door, she slammed her shoulder into it again. This time it opened wide, and the hallway flooded with screams, shouts, and gasps. A dozen staff members surged forward. The respiratory therapist grabbed the asthmatic boy. 2 nurses lifted the girl from Megan's arms. Elle clung to Megan's shirt like it was the last safe thing on earth. Smoke poured out behind them. Sprinklers hissed. Security wheeled in with extinguishers. But all Megan could focus on was the small arms around her neck and the girl's trembling voice whispering, "You came." She didn't even realize she was crying until someone touched her shoulder. Her supervisor, face white, mouth open, speechless in a way she had never seen him. Behind him, parents stood frozen, some crying, some gripping each other's arms. And then, louder than anything, the board member Mrs. Carlson stepped forward, hand over her mouth, eyes wide in pure shock. Megan stood there, chest heaving, clothes streaked with soot. One leg glinting under fluorescent lights, surrounded by children who clung to her like she was the safest person in the world. No one looked at her prosthetic. Not one single person. They looked at her. The woman who walked through fire. Literally. A firefighter burst into the hall a moment later, helmet tucked under his arm, shouting, "Playroom's clear. Whoever got those kids out saved their lives." All eyes swung back to Megan. Her supervisor whispered, voice breaking, "My God. Megan, you..." But she didn't hear the rest, because Jonah had appeared at his doorway hospital gown, hanging off his thin shoulders over a pole, rattling beside him. His mother tried to pull him back, but he pushed her away and limped toward Megan on shaky legs. "Is Elle okay?" he croaked. Megan crouched down, her metal knee clicking softly, and opened her arms. Elle slid into them, sobbing into Megan's shoulder. Megan held both children, breathing in smoke and relief. Jonah's mother was crying openly now. And then, unexpectedly, applause. Soft at first, then building, echoing down the hallway, as staff, parents, firefighters, even security guards clapped for the woman who had done what none of them could do. In that moment, as the sound rose around her, as Elle squeezed her neck, as Jonah gripped her sleeve, as her prosthetic knee hissed and cooled, Megan Price realized something undeniable. Her leg didn't make her less. It didn't make her a liability. It didn't make her a burden or a risk. It made her the one person in that entire hallway who could walk into fire and carry out 3 children without hesitation. And every single person watching knew it. Even the ones who had doubted her. Especially them. The crisis wasn't over. There would be reports, investigations, questions. Consequences would ripple from this moment like waves. But right then, in that smoke-smeared hallway with children clutching her hands and a hospital full of witnesses staring at her in new, stunned respect, everything had changed. For Megan. For her future. For everyone who had ever dared to underestimate her. The hallway stayed hazy long after the last of the smoke drifted toward the vents, a thin gray reminder of everything that could have happened and everything that didn't. Nurses moved quickly, checking oxygen levels, comforting parents, guiding staff outside for fresh air. Somewhere down the corridor, a firefighter shouted coordinates into a radio. But around Megan, there was a strange, stunned quiet. Elle refused to let go of her hand. Jonah leaned into her hip, his small body trembling with adrenaline and fear. parents whispered to each other, glancing at Megan like she was someone they didn't quite know, someone they weren't sure they deserved to know. Her supervisor kept opening his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. And then Mrs. Carlson stepped forward. Her pearls were crooked. Her hands shook. Her face was pale. "You," she began, but a cough broke her words. She cleared her throat and tried again. "You went in alone, with 3 children inside. You could have been killed, I know," Megan said softly. "But you didn't hesitate," the woman whispered. "No," Megan said. "I didn't." Behind them, firefighters wheeled out the burned wheelchair. Its melted armrest sagged toward the floor like a wilted flower. Parents gasped. The little girl's father burst into tears. And that was when Megan saw it, the shift, the collective breath of realization. This wasn't normal bravery. This wasn't instinct alone. This was something practiced, something learned, something born of pain. Her supervisor stepped forward, finally, voice hoarse. "Megan, how did you know to enter like that? How did you know the fire pattern, the safest route? You moved like..." He hesitated, suddenly aware that half the hallway was listening, like someone trained for emergency extraction. Megan looked down, heat rising in her cheeks. Not embarrassment, but memory. A memory she'd folded away like a fragile letter, Tyler sitting on the edge of their bed, lacing his firefighting boots, promising her every morning that he'd come home, even though both of them knew he couldn't promise that. She exhaled slowly. "Because I was trained," she said. Parents turned. Nurses froze. Even the firefighters near the door quieted. "I wasn't always a child life specialist," Megan continued, feeling something inside her loosen. "Before the accident, I was a firefighter trainee, completed 4 phases of the academy. I wanted to be on the rescue team like Tyler." Gasps rippled. Jonah's head snapped toward her eyes, huge. "You were a firefighter," he whispered. "I was learning," she said gently. "Tyler, my fiancé, was the real thing. He died responding to a warehouse collapse. I lost my leg that same night." Her supervisor stared at her like he'd never seen her before. You never told us." "Why would I?" Megan's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "You said parents want normalcy, that I might unsettle them, that I was too much reminder of trauma, that I was a distraction." Each word landed heavy. Across the hall, Mrs. Carlson flinched, as though every syllable struck her personally. "I wasn't hiding my past," Megan continued softly. "But I learned the hard way that people treat you differently when they know how you broke. They make assumptions. They decide what you can or can't do." Her gaze drifted down to the children still holding on to her. "But when you love people, really love them, you don't think. You act. I didn't go into that room because I was trained." She swallowed. "I went in because Elle was in there. And because those kids deserved someone who didn't hesitate." The words rattled through the hallway like something sacred. A firefighter, broad-shouldered and soot-streaked, stepped forward. "Ma'am, with respect, I've seen seasoned guys freeze at a doorway like that. Whatever you did in there, that wasn't instinct. That was craft." He extended a gloved hand. "Your fiancé would be proud." Megan's breath caught. The kids pressed closer. Her prosthetic hummed softly, almost like a heartbeat. Mrs. Carlson suddenly wiped her eyes. "Miss Price, I owe you an apology." "You don't?" Megan murmured. "I do," the woman insisted. Her voice shook. "You aren't a liability. You're the kind of person I want near frightened children. You're the kind of person I'd trust with my own grandchildren. I misjudged you completely. Her supervisor nodded vigorously, stepping in as if trying to shield himself from his own guilt. Megan, about your assignment reallocation? I'm not doing classroom duty, Megan said quietly. No, he agreed quickly. No, you're not. You'll be heading our patient support program. Full oversight. Whatever cases you want. Whatever families you choose. Nurses around them murmured approval. Parents nodded, tears in their eyes. But the biggest shift came from Jonah. He tugged gently on her sleeve. You're like a real superhero, he whispered. Like the ones who save people for real. She knelt wincing as her prosthetic clicked. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who didn't want you or your sister to be scared. She wasn't, he said, swallowing hard. Because she knew you'd come. Elle nodded against Megan's shoulder, tiny arms squeezing tighter. And that was when Jonah's mother stepped closer, wiping tears from her cheeks. Megan, I know this isn't the moment to bring personal things up, but if we ever get discharged, would you, maybe, consider being a part of our family? In some way, a friend, a godparent. Megan blinked rapidly, throat closing. Yes, I'd be honored. Her supervisor cleared his throat, pulling out his phone. I need to call the hospital director immediately. What you did, this changes everything. Mrs. Carlson nodded firmly. No board member with sense will ever question your place here again. And if they do, they'll answer to me. The firefighter nearby let out a low whistle. You should have been on a rescue squad. Megan smiled sadly. I thought I lost that part of me. You didn't, he said. You just brought it here. But then the hospital director himself came rushing down the hallway, breathless tie-askew phone still in hand. I heard there was an incident who pulled the children out. Was it one of the fire team? Everyone pointed at Megan. The director stared at her, stunned. You? Megan nodded once. We need to talk, he said immediately. There's a position we've been discussing for months, a pediatric resilience and trauma coordinator, training staff, helping families in crisis. A role for someone who understands medical trauma from the inside out. Someone who knows how to give hope where there is none. Her heart lurched. Are you offering it to me? I'm offering you the chance to design it, he said. Shape it into what children like Elle and Jonah need. Her breath trembled. She looked at the kids beside her, and then at the charred wheelchair, at the burned wall, at the staff still tending to frightened families. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like someone half-finished. She didn't feel broken. She didn't feel like a compromise. She felt whole and undeniably necessary. Megan, the director, prompted gently. Would you consider it? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, but underneath that word was something bigger, something she didn't say out loud. I'm ready. As the hallway buzzed with the fading adrenaline of the crisis whispers spread through staff and families, that woman saved those kids. She used to be a firefighter. No wonder she ran toward it. She's exactly who we need. Her supervisor, still pale and shaken, stood beside her awkwardly. Megan, I'm so sorry. I should have seen you for who you are, not what I assumed. She met his gaze calmly. Thank you. But it wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was simply truth acknowledged. The fire crew packed up. Parents hugged their children tighter. Nurses pushed wheelchairs back toward the exam rooms. And Megan stood in the center of it all. Smoke still woven into her clothes, children clinging to her hands, and every eye in the hallway looking at her with something brand new. Respect. Awe, trust. A soft voice spoke at her side. Miss Megan. It was Elle, her wide eyes rimmed with soot and tears. Are you going to keep helping kids like us? Megan squeezed her hand. Every single day. The hospital director nodded approvingly. Good. Because after what you did today, your life here is about to change in a very big way. A hush fell. The weight of a new beginning hovered in the air. And as they walked her toward the conference room to formalize everything, Megan felt her prosthetic click softly with each step, steady, grounded, carrying her toward a role she hadn't dared to imagine she could claim again. Her past wasn't something to hide anymore. It was the reason she was still standing. And now, finally, people were beginning to understand that too. Everything moved quickly after that smoke-filled hallway, but none of it felt rushed. It felt right. By the next morning, a bulletin went out hospital-wide naming Megan the acting lead for the new Pediatric Resilience and Trauma Initiative. The director insisted on it. Nurses who barely acknowledged her before were now stopping her in corridors just to squeeze her hand to thank her, to tell her what their own children had said after hearing about the lady with the brave leg. Her supervisor knocked on her office door, midday hat metaphorically in hand. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, the way a man does when he knows he has no right to be comfortable. I spoke with the board, he said quietly. Every word you said yesterday, you were right, and I was wrong. I hope you'll let me earn back your trust. Megan nodded. That was all. No grand forgiveness, just room for someone to start again. Mrs. Carlson came to later that afternoon, clutching a folder against her chest. The pearls were perfectly straight this time. Her voice, though, was softer. I told the board that you are exactly what this hospital needs, she said. And I told them the truth, that I judged you because I was afraid of anything that reminded me I'm not invincible. When the woman's eyes filled with tears, Megan gently touched her arm. We all forget things until someone reminds us. And for the first time since her accident, Megan felt something shift inside her, not anger, not bitterness, something lighter, something like room. The next week was a whirl of planning meetings, safety reviews, and hallway hugs from families who wanted to thank her in person. Elle's parents brought flowers. Jonah proudly delivered a framed copy of his dragon drawing with the words, "Tough like you," written underneath. And then there was Megan's father. He showed up at her apartment on a quiet Sunday night with a casserole he burned slightly, and a look she hadn't seen on his face in years. I read about what you did, he said, as she opened the door. I watched the security footage twice. He cleared his throat, hands twisting in his jacket pockets. I never should have made you feel like your life ended with that accident, or like you had to walk small because of your leg. I didn't know how to help you, so I tried controlling everything instead. I'm sorry. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fancy, but it was real, and it lifted something old and heavy off both of them. I'm doing good, Dad, she said, leaning against him. Really good. 3 months later, the new Trauma Support Center opened bright murals, sensory-friendly lighting private rooms for families in crisis. The sign over the entrance read, Resilience Unit, coordinated by Megan Price, CLS. At the ribbon cutting, the director handed her the scissors and whispered, You earned this twice over. But the best part wasn't the title, or the respect, or the applause. It was the kids. They found her everywhere now, tiny hands reaching for hers in elevators, little voices asking if she was the lady from the fire. And every time Megan knelt down and said, I'm just someone who won't let you be scared alone. A year after the fire, on a warm spring afternoon, she visited the playroom, the newly rebuilt playroom. A place she'd helped design from the ground up. The wheelchair ramp curved like a gentle river. The walls glowed with paintings made by former patients. And by the window, Jonah and Ella were building a Lego city, arguing about who got the blue bricks. "Megan," they shouted when they saw her. "Come help us with the bridge." She laughed, settling beside them on the floor. Her prosthetic leg clicked softly as she folded herself down. "What kind of bridge?" she asked. "The strong kind," Jonah said. "The kind that doesn't fall," added Elle. "The kind that saves people," he finished. Megan helped them snap the pieces together. The plastic arches rose steadily, imperfectly, beautifully, like everything she had rebuilt in her own life. As they worked, she glanced around the room, nurses smiling. Parents relaxed, sunlight spilling across the space that once held fear, but now held possibility. A quiet peace settled in her chest. Not the shaky peace of surviving, the steady peace of belonging. She hadn't just found her place. She'd created it, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. And when the kids declared their bridge finished crooked but standing, Megan felt an answering strength settle through her. Life had knocked her down. Life had taken things she didn't know how to lose. But life had also brought her back to a place where she could hold scared children close, walk into fire when needed, and build something lasting from all the broken pieces. In the end, her story wasn't about trauma. It wasn't about loss. It wasn't even about bravery. It was about connection, the kind built not from perfection, but from showing up again and again, even when the world underestimates you. And as Megan stood and watched the children rush around their new playroom, her metal knee humming softly beneath her scrubs, she thought of the lesson she wished she could hand to every frightened parent, every hurting child, every person who felt too much for someone else's comfort. The strongest bridges aren't the flawless ones. They're the ones built from courage held together by purpose and walked across every day despite the cracks. And sometimes those bridges lead you exactly where you were meant to be all along.